I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and I got to tell y'all that we are very excited to be part of this conference once again. This is our third year working with y'all, and it's awesome. We just love coming here. We get our batteries charged up. We get inspired by the spirit in this group, and we learn from you. And so thank you for letting us participate in your conference once again. We did something different this year. You'll notice that, in the previous years, we had a panel discussion. We had a conservative joining us. That was Bruce Fine. And this year we decided to change things up a little bit and brought a little bit of spice to the conference and provide some people from the left persuasion, liberals, progressives, and throughout the program that we've been having here during this conference, both in our morning sessions and our afternoon sessions, in what we were calling our conference within a conference. Now, some of you may say, well, now, why are they doing that? Why is the Future of Freedom Foundation inviting liberals and progressives to a libertarian conference? Well, you know, as you may know, FFF has always taken an uncompromising principled role in the libertarian movement. We've never compromised one iota of libertarian principles. We are pure libertarians at FFF. And half the time we devote ourselves to economic liberty. In fact, we have a drawing of a great painting of Ludwig von Mises. And so come by our booth and put your name in the box and you get a chance for that drawing. The painting was done by an artist named Jack Frazier from Annapolis, who donated it to us for this conference. His paintings have been shown in galleries all across Virginia and DC. His paintings go for about $1,500 to $5,000. And it's a beautiful portrait of Ludwig von Mises. So be sure you register there. And that's what we do. And half our efforts is devote, our efforts to economic liberty, opposing the drug war, and so forth. But ever since our inception, we've taken a leading role in the defense of civil liberties. And especially since 9/11. Because we happen to believe that the warfare state poses a much graver threat than anything else that we're encountering in our lives. And so what we did after 9/11 is we watched and we saw which of the conservatives caved with respect to their man in office, George W. Bush, and started supporting what he was doing. And let's see what liberals, progressives were going to cave in when Barack Obama came in. And we determined, we ferreted out the people that maintained a consistent principled position on civil liberties and against the national security state and the torture and the war on terrorism and so forth. And we started aligning ourselves with conservatives like Bruce Fine, with liberals like Glenn Greenwald. Many of you know we did 2 college civil liberties tours with Glenn Greenwald, myself, and Bruce Fine. And, bringing students awareness of the critical importance of civil liberties. And so that's what we wanted to do with this conference. We wanted to spice things up. Half our speakers are libertarians, half our speakers are liberals, and then we wanted to form this wonderful panel. I mean, I can't tell you how psyched we've been at FFF about this panel for 2 months. And I met Oliver Stone a few months ago at a conference, and we started exchanging emails, and I said, hey, I know he's a progressive, and I said, hey, we're putting together a conference at a big libertarian organization where they've got like 1,500 students, and is there any chance that you'd consider coming and speaking at this and letting people know your perspective and why civil liberties are so important to you? And he didn't hesitate. He says, I would love to. If I'm not filming, I will be there. And then he says, how about inviting my collaborator on my Untold History series, Peter Kuznick? And I contacted Peter, and I know he was a big progressive as well. And I said, you'd be interested in coming to a big libertarian conference with libertarian students? Count me in. I'd love to. And then they suggested that we contact Jeremy Scahill. And Scahill is one of my heroes. I had just seen his film, Dirty Wars, and I came back to the office saying, this is a fantastic film about what's going on. And all of a sudden, I get a letter from one of his producers saying, Scahill's on board. And so all of a sudden, we had this fantastic panel to present to you, and we're very, very pleased with it. By the way, they're going to be available, all 3 of them, for book signing after this panel discussion at our booth. They won't be able to stay indefinitely, but maybe autograph as many as possible. And all our books are great. And so without any further ado, let me do a short introduction of our panel here. Oliver Stone is an Academy Award-winning Hollywood director, directed such films as JFK, Platoon, Natural Born Killers, Wall Street, and many, many more. The Doors. And so it's fantastic that we have Oliver here. His collaborator on the Untold History series is Peter Kuznick, who teaches history at American University right here. They put together this fantastic series for Showtime.
I wasn't objecting to it.
Fantastic series on Showtime, Peter and Oliver, that's now available on the internet. It's fantastic. Then Jeremy Scahill has done this great film, Dirty Wars, a book of the same name. And lo and behold, 3 weeks ago or so, Jeremy's film, the one that I love, it shows you I got good taste, got nominated for an Academy Award for Best Documentary. So we'll learn about that in March. And then we have the honor and pleasure of our moderator, who is Shelby Coffey, who is vice chairman at the museum. I emailed Shelby and I said, would you be interested in moderating this panel? He says, man, count me in. And he was executive producer at ABC News before that, CNN, FN. So it's an honor and pleasure. If you've never been to a museum, you're missing a lot. It's a fantastic museum in DC. So without any further, the structure of what we're going to be doing, we're going to show a short excerpt, about 10 minutes, from Untold History, Chapter 10. And then we're going to open it up for the panel discussion that will be moderated by Shelby. Would you please give a warm Students for Liberty welcome to our panel.
Ask you first. Much of that comes from the final chapter in the 10-part series, Managing a Wounded Empire. So I thought we would divide between where we are as a country in the national security state, how we got here, and where we might be going. So let's start with where we are. What do you see as the state of the national security state today at this point? And then with the professor, we'll get to how we got here.
Briefly, I know we're all, time is an element. This was finished in January of 2013, literally, at the last second. So we were right up to that moment. After that, of course, in 2013, we had the Ed Snowden affair, which brought to light more of this, what we're talking about, this direction, this surveillance, this we will know everything there is to know in the world, although we may not be able to do anything about it. But we believe we will, and I think that Obama is managing it as ably as he can, and I think with the drone dominance coming up and what McCoy has described as these new weapons from space. Of course, we've always wanted to militarize space. This has never went away from Ronald Reagan on. He's insisted on militarizing space. The Russians and the Chinese have not wanted to, and they have no choice now but to face up to this threat. The U.S., with cyber warfare in Iran, and what we are aiming at China, what we've learned from Snowden, we're a serious, serious superpower. There's been nothing like it in the history of the world. This is a very crucial moment. I mean, perhaps everyone says this in every century, but my God, we could blow up the world as we saw in that little sci-fi clip from George Lucas. This thing is serious. They can, with a drone from 150 miles up in space, as McCoy has said, you can pinpoint an enemy, a terrorist as well as a Chinese army or a Chinese air force, and destroy it. This is a very, very dangerous place because Obama may be, who knows, you have issues here with Obama. I certainly agree with you. This 2008 election was a disaster. We all thought it was going to be the Democratic turning point. It was not. We know that. And the surveillance state has continued and grown bigger. It was probably as disastrous an election in truth now, looking at it, as the 2000 election was, which was the beginning of a new acceleration global security. I'm scared. I'm scared. But, you know, it's a race between us blowing up the planet and climate change destroying the planet, perhaps. You tell me.
Peter, where do we stand in the national security state at this point, and then we're going to get later back to how we got here?
As Oliver was saying, we're at a crucial juncture now because the strategy has been shifting. Even Robert Gates says that any future Secretary of Defense who advises the President to send a land army into Asia, Africa, or Latin America should have his head examined. So we're doing it other ways. We're doing it less expensive ways. We're doing it more effective ways. We now have special operations forces in 134 countries. Special operations forces are acting now in 134 countries. Since Obama took over, that's a 123% increase in special ops forces. So this is his idea. It's that plus the surveillance. And the surveillance is massive. The Stasi's motto was to know, East German secret police motto was to know everything about everybody. They couldn't do it. They were bumblers, they were amateurs. But we can do it now. In East Germany, there was one police informer for every 6 people. Now, and that's how you can monitor that country. Now we've got 34,000 people in the NSA can monitor the entire globe. One person now monitors 200,000 people globally. So we're much more efficient. So we're getting away from the old-scale invasions of mass armies to targeted killings, assassinations. As Obama says, I'm really good at killing people.
That was a Huffington Post quote, I believe.
That was in the book.
So, Jeremy, you have seen the tip of the spear in terms of drones. Your movie recounts the aftermath of several drone strikes and the growth of JSOC, the Special Operations Command. How is this playing on the ground? You brought the voices from the ground back. We've been at the other end of it.
First, I want to thank everyone for coming out, and I think it really is a testament to the sort of spirit of open dialogue that exists here, and I think I speak for all of us just to say that we're honored to be with all of you. When I announced on Twitter that I was going to come here, all these liberals just started piling on and attacking me, like, you know, libertarians have cooties or something, you know. And it's funny because you know, I'm not a Democrat or a Republican. I'm a journalist, and I don't consider myself a member of either of those parties, and they don't speak for me. And I might be the only person on the planet who, in the same calendar year, has spoken to Students for Liberty, Socialism Conference, and the U.S. Naval War College. But before I answer your question, Shelby, I also want to say the vast majority of the hate mail that I get today is from hardcore partisan Democrats who are nothing more than lemmings for the White House. And when you watch MSNBC, it's like watching one big Obama for America meetup. And when you watch Fox News, it's full of conspiracy theories about the scary black Marxist Manchurian candidate who wants to resurrect Chairman Mao and put him in charge of our economy. And so, you know, I find that we're at a moment where, at times, Senator Rand Paul, for instance, when he filibusters the nomination of John Brennan, actually is reflecting what should be some of the core values of liberals when it comes to questions of civil liberties, of the rights of Americans to know whether they're on a kill list, on the right of the Congress to know what assertions the White House is making about who it can assassinate around the world, how it determines the guilt of individuals that it wants to target for drone strikes. Not a single Democrat would join Rand Paul in that filibuster. Senator Ron Wyden of Oregon came down to the floor and in some mild act of support for Rand Paul. But largely what you've seen happen is that this handful of largely libertarian, or some of them Tea Party members of Congress, have been leading the way and standing up to this White House on these issues because the Democrats have largely checked their consciences at the door of the Obama presidency. And so what we're seeing now is the reality that we only actually have one party in this country when it comes to national security policy and war policy. It is the war party. And it doesn't matter if it's a Democrat or Republican, the policy is consistent. We are living in a moment where we have a man in the White House who won the Nobel Peace Prize, who is a constitutional lawyer by training, and who is presiding over a global assassination program, and is presiding over a massive surveillance state. And a lot of liberals would have expected this from Dick Cheney, who's a cartoonish villain that I actually do think lives in a cave and spends his nights and days thinking of how to fuck up the world. But Obama, you know, look, if there's one major difference from the Bush presidency to Obama, we have a president who speaks the English language fluently, and it's a great change. But at the end of the day, I do think that Cheney is you know, on a fishing boat somewhere, having a good chuckle and thanking God that Barack Obama was elected president and not John McCain, because it made it possible for that one-party state to continue its reign. And Obama has expanded, in many cases, some of the most egregious aspects of the Bush-Cheney so-called counterterrorism program. He's become the drone president. He has poured billions of dollars more into the coffers of paramilitary aspects of the CIA. He has created a blank check for special operations forces to run this global hit squad around the world, and at the same time has pushed a neoliberal economic agenda. So you have the sort of iron fist of US militarism and covert action backing up the hidden hand of these neoliberal economic policies. And so where we stand, to come around to the question, is in a moment where at some point the American people have to ask themselves what they're going to do about the fact that there really is only one party that is running the show when it comes to foreign policy and military policy, and if we want to continue into the next half century under this model.
Okay, let's go back, because that's a strong set for the prosecution. And let me ask one question. I was at the museum, to which you were all invited. It's a temple of the First Amendment, and this is part of the free speech exercise we get to enjoy here. And I was at the museum on the inauguration night of Obama in 2009. Unbelievable, the electricity, the hopes, everything for that particular point. Now it's 5 years later. Few presidents have happy times in their second term, but the disillusion, as you mentioned, is fairly sizable. Here's the question: why? Why do you think he has taken this course? I'll start with you, Alan.
It's a very good question, and it will be answered in time. Mm-hmm. In our history, we felt that something did happen between the momentum that he had in the election process. He had all these contributions through the internet, they were talking about it, and at a certain point he took the private option over the public option, which was a significant, very significant at the time, but few people noticed it. And we recognized, because he did have that momentum over McCain, that Wall Street, the pharmaceuticals, the computer companies, it was easy to get behind the winner. And they put the money in, and they offered him the money, and he took it. Now that is the question. Why? What happened behind the scenes? Perhaps some of you know. I know all the details. But when you take that kind of money, your principles may be heavily compromised. And something happened because none of the things he promised, the transparency, a government that would be reconsider the war on terror and these programs, none of that happened. None of it. And in his choice of advisors early on, it was very clear right away when he picked Hillary Clinton that, and Robert Gates, who is a criminal, basically, who's been in government since 1980, and I don't use that word lightly. Considering what he did with Casey in Iran-Contra, a lot of people know the story on Gates. I mean, amazing that Gates reemerged as a moderate in this so-called administration. and his choice of his economic advisors, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. On everything he backed down, like Jeremy said. The man stunned us with his lack of spine. It's unbelievable. A weak man. I was stunned. And I knew him from when he was running, and he was so passionate and strong, and his condemnation of this way of life. He sensed art, he sensed his liberal base, and he completely abandoned it, except for the Democrats that Jeremy talks about. I don't know those people, they don't talk to me, but obviously, you know, I know what you're talking about, the Bill Maher, MSNBC stuff. I don't get booked on MSNBC anymore, I don't know.
Bill Maher is looking for you any week.
Well, yeah, but Bill is, you know, as Jeremy was saying, Bill believes in drones, you know. He says drones are better than boots on the ground, which I don't agree with at all. I don't, why interfere in the first place, you know? So, I would love to hear what happened. I'd love to know.
Okay. You're the professional historian,
Well,
chief historian of mine.
historians know enough to keep from
wait for 25 years.
We don't figure it all out in 5 years necessarily.
That's what we journalists are for.
Because Oliver was saying, not only are drones not better, the thing about the drones is they're a lot cheaper. The Iraq War cost the United States $3 trillion. Now between our surveillance and our drones and our special ops, we can accomplish the same American hegemony and domination around the world on a few tens of billions of dollars. So, and at the time when the United States is trying to cut back, we actually have cut defense spending from when Obama took office. So we're trying to do things on the cheap. How do we maintain an empire on the cheap is the strategy now. We still have our bases. We still have 700 to 1,000 bases. We don't know how many. But we've got an empire of bases, as Chalmers Johnson said. But we've been trying to do it efficiently and cost effectively. And Obama has figured out how to do that. There are other ways to cut back more, and we can give him some advice on that. The thing about the Obama presidency, from the very beginning, we should have taken him a little bit more seriously what he was saying. He says he wasn't opposed to wars, he was opposed to dumb wars. And he said Iraq is a dumb war. But he let us know that he was going to double down on Afghanistan. We know that in terms of the troop increases, he tripled down on Afghanistan. But he was boxed in there. And you know, this has ambivalence. All we're saying, this is an extraordinarily spineless person. If Obama had been president during the Cuban Missile Crisis, instead of Kennedy, he would have followed the advice of the military. We would have taken down those missile sites. We would have invaded. We would have confronted 100 battlefield nuclear weapons, 3 times as many armed Russian and Cuban troops as we figured. 100,000 Americans would have been killed, as McNamara says, and the nuclear war would have started, and much of the world wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be meeting in Washington today, probably, if Obama had been president. That's why we admire Kennedy in so many ways, because he had the backbone, the vision, and the guts to stand up to his military. Very few presidents have that. But Obama set the trap for himself, though. As Oliver was saying, it wasn't as if he got in there and then they started to scare him about what's going on in the world or threaten him. He surrounded himself with the worst possible advisors. He surrounded himself with hawks in terms of foreign policy and what the New York Times called the constellation of Reubenites when it came to economic policy. So it's not a surprise that Wall Street made off like bandits in 2008, 2009, 2010, and ever since. And it's not surprising that our policies have been so militarized under Obama. We feared that. We knew that when Bush made that power grab and brought all those increased powers to the presidency, as Cheney was urging him to do, that it would be very hard and very unlikely that a future president was going to give up any of that. We had hopes that Obama would, as a constitutional lawyer, as an intelligent person, somebody who seemed to have a certain kind of decency, but in some ways he increased it. In terms of surveillance, in terms of other things he was doing, he's actually taken a bad situation from Bush and Cheney and made it worse, and he's also legitimized it in a way that Bush and Cheney never could. When Bush and Cheney were doing these things, we were horrified. You know, the left was mobilized, the libertarians were mobilized, but Obama diffused that. Not only did he quiet those students, my students were out there in great numbers in 2008. They were really energized for the first time. I haven't seen anything like that since the late 60s in this country. And they were really excited. They thought they could change the world. And Obama made them so cynical. by demobilizing them, and then by going against what they thought he stood for, he's created a generation. That's why I'm really glad to see so many young people here today. We might not agree on all the issues, but I respect the fact that you kids care enough to be out here. The former poet laureate, Maxine Kuhlman, died this week, you might have seen, and she said that she has her students memorize 30 to 40 lines of poetry a week. And she said she does that so when if they're ever taken political prisoner, they'll have this memory to draw upon to keep themselves strong in prison. But she said, but very few, she said none of her students, she said, now even have a belief in something that they're willing to fight for and die for, or go to prison for, but I think students here, like some of my progressive students, really do, and that's the spirit we need in this country.
And there's a reason why Professor Peters is voted one of the best on the American University campus. You reach across. So, Jeremy, just to complete it, why? What do you think happened?
In a way, who's president of the United States matters very little. I mean, they're largely engaged in image management. I mean, yes, there are significant policy decisions that are made, but what is, I think, more, well, and first of all, I think that a lot of the criticism of Obama from liberals who are disaffected is somewhat disingenuous because Obama largely telegraphed his passes. If you went beyond the tin can campaign speech and actually looked at who he was surrounding himself with, read his policy positions, and then looked at speeches he gave in places like APAC and elsewhere, you got a clear sense that he was going to be a manager of empire, and that he saw himself that way. And he tapped into, and I think this is very cynical, he tapped into the fact that so many people did want a clean break from the Bush-Cheney era, and they were willing to sort of project onto Obama what they wanted to see in a candidate, rather than exploring who he actually was. And I think that that's a whole other interesting discussion about the kind of myth of Obama, the great progressive anti-war candidate. But what I think is more important to focus on is the national security beast that always is residing in this town. And it's the intelligence agencies, it's the huge war corporations that are the only beneficiaries of the so-called war on terror, and it is the military leadership, the permanent military leadership. The people who run the permanent national security state know that they can wait out any president, and that they can try to lobby internally and with their corporate friends to make sure that the next guy or the next woman, as it may be if Hillary Clinton wins, is going to be more favorable to their interests. And to me, that is the huge behemoth that we're facing. Obama had no military experience, very limited foreign policy experience outside of his brief tenure on the Foreign Relations Committee. He gets the nomination for the Democratic Party for president. Then he is entitled by law to a briefing, an all-access briefing by the CIA on the state of global intelligence and the national security situation of the United States. You saw a sharp change in Obama's rhetoric after he received that briefing from Michael Hayden at the Federal Building in Chicago. Obama then comes into office, and he is briefed by the most powerful figures in the national security beast. Admiral William McRaven, who is probably the single most powerful figure in the U.S. military today, the head of all special operations forces around the world, an original member of SEAL Team 6 and a journalist by training at university.
Chalk one up.
You have Admiral William McRaven, General David Petraeus, General Stanley McChrystal, both of whom were filthy with blood on their hands from Iraq and all sorts of other actions in the early stages of the so-called war on terror, and then the heads of all 16 U.S. intelligence agencies, and they inundate Obama with the potential threats against the U.S. homeland. Not just hundreds of concurrent threats, but thousands of concurrent threats. Subways may be blown up, airplanes may be taken down, embassies abroad can be attacked, sporting events are going to be blown up, shopping malls are going to be attacked with gunmen, and they just inundate Obama, the new president, with all this information. And Obama's political advisors, David Axelrod, Rahm Emanuel, are cynical people. They're sitting in the room listening to this stuff, and they're not focused on, I'm not saying they don't care if America was attacked, but they're not focused on that as their top priority when they're listening to these briefings. They're focused on not having a one-term presidency. So what happens is Obama embraces the Joint Special Operations Command, this secretive elite military all-star team, and the CIA's paramilitary force, not as the implementers of a policy, but as the policy itself. Hunt and kill and preemptive war became the doctrine of Obama's national security policy, and essentially they outsourced it to the most unsavory forces within the US national security apparatus. And it's totally out of control to this day. They have the run of the game. The military and the CIA are in full control of a huge portion of America's foreign policy, and it's an expansionist foreign policy, and it's a foreign policy that's going to create blowback, because we're killing a tremendous number of innocent people. We are making more new enemies every day than we are killing actual terrorists or people who pose a threat to our country.
So let me push back just a touch.
That's not allowed.
He's flying back to LA. He's got to get ready for that Academy Award speech. This will be the interactive here. We can help Jeremy write the award. Doesn't have a huge budget for going after this thing.
I will not be quoting Milton Friedman. But it's not.
But maybe, just maybe. Okay. So let me do just a slight pushback, citing as my sources Monsieur Stone and the professor here on the issue of who is president actually does matter to some considerable extent. And this is really just a way to get back into the backstory. Your Woodrow Wilson and Harry Truman examples from this very expansive and interesting look at the rise of the national security state. Could you talk a little bit about that?
When Jeremy was speaking, I was thinking about, again, Kennedy. Because when Kennedy got briefed on nuclear weapons by his top generals, the Joint Chiefs, the first time they were briefing him on our nuclear war plans, he walked out. He just walked out on them. Then when they were briefing him the second time on our first strike capabilities, surprise first strike nuclear attack on the Soviet Union, afterwards he turned to Dean Rusk and said, and we call ourselves the human race. I mean, Kennedy understood that. I mean, not everybody in that situation caves as easily as Obama did. Yeah, Oliver and I think that people can make a difference. Even people in the White House can make a difference. Jeremy's absolutely right in terms of structural analysis. Sure. I mean, the forces these people are under, the intelligence community, the military, the corporations, the warfare state. Eisenhower warned about this. We all know about Eisenhower's farewell address. What most people don't realize is that Eisenhower was warning about himself because he did more to create the military-industrial complex than any other president. When Eisenhower took office, we had about 1,000 nuclear weapons. When Eisenhower left office, we had 23,000 nuclear weapons. When his budgeting cycle was finished, we had 30,000 nuclear weapons. When Eisenhower took office, we had one finger on the nuclear button. When he left office, we had scores of fingers on the nuclear button. Nuclear weapons were our first priority, our first use, not the last resort as they were even under Truman before that. Our Strategic Integrated Operations Plan, this first PSYOP that he left his successor, the Joint Chiefs said, would kill 650 million people just with America's weapons. So we're talking about over 100 Holocausts with America's weapons. That was our war plan. But presidents do make a difference. Wilson, first of all, presidents lie us into wars. And even presidents who we like more helped lie us into World War II. Roosevelt. One of the things that Oliver and I highlight in our book and our documentaries is what would have happened if Henry Wallace had become president in 1945 instead of Harry Truman. But most Americans don't realize, most Americans don't even know who Henry Wallace is. He was vice president from 1940 to 44. When Henry Luce said the 20th century is going to be the American century, Henry Wallace said, no, it must be the century of the common man, and he called for a worldwide people's revolution. In 1944, when they were going to decide on who to put on the ticket as vice president, Gallup did a poll of potential voters on the night the Democratic Convention started, July 20th, 1944, And 65% of potential voters said they wanted Henry Wallace back on the ticket as vice president. 2% wanted Harry Truman. Oliver and I argue that had Wallace become president instead of Truman in 1945, there would have certainly been no atomic bombing in 1945 in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and there very likely would have been no Cold War, or if there was some kind of Cold War, it would have looked very, very different than what occurred. So presidents can make a big difference, but the problem is they get captured. Jimmy Carter, if you look at the beginning of Carter's presidency, there was actually a breath of sanity in terms of a lot of his policies. He talked about nuclear disarmament, he was talking about changing relations around the world, but then he got captured by those same interests. You look at the last 2 years of the Carter presidency, and he leads right into Reagan's foreign policies around the world, whether it's Afghanistan, El Salvador, Nicaragua, and Brzezinski brags about how he captured Carter, giving him the president's daily briefings himself every day with nobody else there, instead of the CIA doing it, has been the pattern before. So presidents can make a difference, but they're up against a lot. As Jeremy was explaining, they scare the crap out of these guys. Right from the very beginning, they exert that influence, and very few of them have the strength or the outside forces. When they stand up strong, like Roosevelt did in the mid-30s, it was because the labor movement was mobilized. It was because there was a huge groundswell of left-wing support to move this country in a certain direction. Given that strength, Roosevelt was actually willing to take certain risks politically. But without that kind of mobilized grassroots, I don't think we're going to see any of these presidents stand up in that way.
Okay, we want to get to the two documentaries. I'd like to ask Oliver a little bit about why you did this particular series on the Untold History instead of why you decided to do that instead of another feature film, and then we'll get to Jeremy on his movie.
I think it was a midlife late crisis. I think I was inspired by George Bush. Those 8 years were, for me as a Vietnam veteran, were a deja vu nightmare. Really sad at what happened in those 8 years. And I thought to myself, well, I don't really know, I'm not trained in history, I'm a dramatist. And I wanted to find out, is this an aberration, or is he a continuation of a pattern? And with Peter, who's the director of nuclear studies, who took me back to the World War II atomic bomb and the Henry Wallace story, it's a wonderful hook to get in. But history to me is very dynamic and exciting, and I love it. But how do I dramatize it? And we spent 5 years trying to figure it out. We went back to 1898, actually the Philippines, when we went overseas with the Philippines and Cuba. And we found basically after Bush is a continuation, is an exaggerated continuation. And in reference to the man versus the system, I agree with Jeremy now. And in Nixon, the movie, there's a line that Nixon says, this beast, he talks about this beast that he can't control. And around that time, with Kennedy being assassinated by what many of us believe is the military industrial mentality. And with Nixon being cut out of power, possibly for his Chinese and Russian détentes, we find that the president becomes less important. And Carter is one of the last breaths. Clinton tries also, but the gay military issue and the healthcare issue quickly seem to drive him into more conservative positions. Obama never started. It never started. So disingenuous, no, Jeremy, no. Frankly, we're not, because we really believe. We believe with the surface. You're a journalist who went deeper, perhaps, but we didn't see that. He was being sold to the country. He was a cover of Time magazine, was comparing him to Roosevelt. We really thought there was a Roosevelt moment here because the bankers had behaved so badly that we felt it was coming. There was something coming. That's why we really were disillusioned. And I don't think it is disingenuous. But I do believe now it's the system, the cause and effect, where Obama is nailed. It's so tight now for any president to go against what Ronald Reagan really started to, the cascade started with Reagan. In 1980, we've been in 34 years of increasing conservatism. And how do you get out of this box? How do you get out of this box? I believe, God, I hope to God that it can happen. I believe in the Gorbachev story. I really do. Because here is this guy who grew up in that system. He was a dedicated, that he saw the rot. He felt it, he understood it economically, he saw it coming, and he made that decision with many reformers around him to change that system. It came out of the blue. CIA didn't figure it out. They didn't know shit about it. So maybe something like that could happen here. Maybe. How that guy would never become president, I don't know. But he could change an office like Nixon about China, or Reagan to some degree about Gorbachev. But it's a long shot. Or perhaps it'll be external, which is also the other way this thing will go.
My name is Muriel Kraft. I'm an attorney from Hanover, Pennsylvania, and a true lover of liberty forever. But one of my challenges that I see on a regular basis are the number of particularly young women who are now addicted to heroin. And I was wondering if any of you can say anything to the effect of our involvement in Afghanistan and the protection of the opium trade, which apparently is producing about 80% of the heroin that is now being brought into this country.
I think, Jeremy, you've been most recently in Afghanistan.
Well, you know, it's interesting. One of Oliver's last films, Savages, to some degree deals with this. It's a Navy SEAL who was in Afghanistan, brings back a strand of weed, and he and his buddy start this business in California based on this like incredible Afghanistan marijuana, and run this lucrative business that then gets them in trouble with this Mexican narco cartels, which is sort of interesting connection to Oliver's work in that question. But the people that the U.S. has propped up in Afghanistan from the very beginning, Hamid Karzai and his network, and you know, some of the warlords are deeply involved with the heroin trade. Heroin production has increased in many areas as a result of the warlords that are being backed by the U.S. or other outside players, and has a direct impact on you know, what happens in the United States with, you know, with the heroin problem. You saw this too in the Balkans in the 1990s, where you had these Albanian mafia groups that were smuggling heroin through the Balkans and then to Italy and out to the rest of the Western world. And it's interesting when you follow the U.S. military footprint, you know, you often see the politics of drugs there. Alfred McCoy, who you saw in the video there in Peter and Oliver's film, was a professor of mine at the University of Wisconsin, and he wrote a book called The Politics of Heroin in Southeast Asia, and it was all about the CIA and these sort of drug wars that follow the military intervention. So I think there's definitely a direct connection between our wars abroad and then how narcotics make it into the United States.
All right, let's see. Why don't we go right here? We'll stick to the center here just for a minute, then we'll lurch to the left next.
Hello, my name is Kenan Safadi. I'm a senior at the University of Virginia. I'm kind of different among my libertarian friends because I came from sort of the left, and I supported Obama when he was running because I reasoned that nobody could be worse than Bush. Well, I think I'm probably wrong about that. But ever since then, I've had a bit of a political cynicism, not just towards the left, but towards politics in general, and that we can affect change really through politics. I'm just wondering, you talked about the beast. What do you think we can actually do as regular people to fight back against the beast? Do we need another beast of our own, a beast of popular outrage against these sorts of really crimes that I feel they are?
Peter, why don't you take that?
Well, we have to look historically. And historically, people have been able to rise up and challenge power. And it happens with grassroots movements. Unlike the Occupy movement, which didn't have enough leadership to sustain itself, but you saw that it tapped into a deep-seated feeling in American society that things are wrong. And this is a global issue. The Occupy movement tapped into the gap between rich and poor, the inequality. The fact that the richest 1% in this country have more wealth than the bottom 90%. But if you look at this globally, it's even worse than that. Oxfam recently came out with a report saying that the richest 85 people in the world have more wealth than the poorest 3.5 billion people in the world. If there's not enough deep-seated anger about what's going on now in terms of the warfare state, in terms of the gap between rich and poor, in terms of the way the wealthy are taking over every aspect of society and sucking it up for themselves, in terms of the surveillance and the killing, and in terms of the environmental issues, as Oliver mentioned, we're going to destroy ourselves as a species with the destruction of the environment. I mean, people have got to understand that they can't put up with this, that they're not going to have a future, their children, their grandchildren are not going to have a future. But what we have to do is show them that it can have some effect, which is why what happened in 2008 to me is so demoralizing, so depressing. The fact that people were mobilized, they thought like you, that you could change something, but to become cynical about politics is to play right into their hands. It's to play their game. Which is why, with Bush especially, but we see with Obama, when there are protesters, they put them in these zones 3 miles away. Same thing's happening in Sochi. But this attitude that you have to teach people, one of the ways that they control is by convincing people that their protests are either futile or that there's no point in doing anything because this is the best of all possible worlds and the best possible system. So Obama does this with his targeted assassinations. It's so much better than boots on the ground. But in terms of mobilizing, when there are periods that people weren't cynical, one of the reasons why we did this and we're so focused on history is we're basing this on the argument that people's understanding of history is going to shape how they act in the present and in the future. If people can't imagine a different past, then they're not going to be able to imagine a different future. So we're trying to show how close we've come repeatedly to having very different outcomes. And if you look at the past, you study the past, you study history, you understand that people have fought. And the reason why we have as many rights as we have now is because people have fought for those rights. And the reason why the situation is not a lot worse now than it is because people have resisted. And that it's more necessary now than ever. And that's what we're trying to show people, the lessons of history, in order to show not only how bad things are, but how people have fought against them in the past to give people the spirit and the hope that we can do that again.
I also think that the premier issue that any of us could work on in terms of just looking at the political process in this country, regardless of what your issue is to get huge corporations out of our political campaign process. Because, and I may be saying something here that's a little bit toxic, I don't know, but I believe it. The Democrats are now the largest recipients of money from the war industry, because that industry sees which way the wind is blowing. When they think a Republican's going to win, they'll favor them. When they think a Democrat's going to win, favor them. Big pharma, big energy, all of these corporate interests are purchasing members of Congress in a legalized form of bribery that in some countries looks like suitcases of cash going to someone. But here we just call it campaign finance. And until the corporations have less of a voice, I mean huge corporations, I'm not talking about small businesses, I'm talking about big behemoth corporations, until we stop this system where they can just purchase Democrats and Republicans and that their interests are more important than the interests of ordinary people in this country, nothing will ever fundamentally change. Just one thing in defense of Oliver on the question, and I understand the spirit of the question that was asked about Latin America. I've spent a lot of time in various countries in Central and Latin America. I've been to Cuba, I don't know, 6 or 7 times, and I think it relates also to what you're saying. In Cuba, when Fulgencio Batista was the dictator, it was just a playground for the rich in America. It was casinos and mafia bosses and United Fruit and these huge corporations, and the literacy rates were atrocious, and power was in the hands of a few who largely had sold their country to the interests of the mafia and corporations in the United States. What happened as a result of the Cuban Revolution is that the whole landscape changed there. When I was in Cuba, though, on the one hand, I was very impressed with the educational system, the healthcare system, with the interpretation of human rights, including a right to have a house, a right to have an education, a right to have free healthcare. On the other hand, and I said this publicly in the presence of senior Cuban officials, I think that their jailing of dissidents, that they're cracking down on a free press, is counterproductive. I think they could win based on the ideas, and they don't need to do it. Now, I'm sure many of you in the room would disagree with my position on this, or Oliver's position on this, but I think for both of us, it comes from a desire for people actually to be free in those countries. I don't think we have a different agenda from the young man who asked the question. I think we have a different interpretation of what's going on, probably because of our political orientation. But I am against cracking down on the free press in Cuba as much as I am cracking down on the free press in the United States. I was going after Russia last night on the Bill Maher show in the context of I was praising Snowden and then criticizing the Russians. I think the left should do a better job of being self-critical, but the forces allied against a lot of populist movements on the left in the world are bankrolled by huge capital and big corporate interests. So, I think this is a debate that we should have, and I respect the young man who got up and said that. I know it takes guts to do that with, so powerful of a presence as Oliver, but I also think Oliver is someone that wants to engage in that debate as much as I do, and I think that's part of why we were so happy to get the invitation from all of you to be here today.
Okay, we have one more thing. All right, I'm sorry, we're out of time, so you can
add one little thing.
The professor has one more thing.
So the question that was asked before about becoming cynical and thinking you can't change anything, we've got one good example of when the people on the left and the libertarians got together and stopped the war policy, and that's in Syria. Just very, very recently, Obama was targeting Syria with those missiles, and we got together. Our forces on both sides got together and stopped him. And had Putin not intervened at that moment, we said it was great what he did, but he should have waited another week till Congress voted it against the U.S. bombing of Syria, and that would have been a great victory for our forces combined. And that's what we need, is to get together on the things we agree on and stop these people.
Terrific panel. You've been a great audience, and I want to leave you with one quote, since I also went to UVA. You've got to have Thomas Jefferson quoted everything. A people that want to be ignorant and free never were and never will be. So thank you for coming and listening to the dialogue and applying your own critical thinking. Thank you.